The cafe was warm, glowing softly with yellow lights that reflected off polished wooden tables, the kind of place where laughter lingered in the air even after people left. Outside, the evening rain tapped gently against the glass windows, blurring the city into streaks of gray and gold. She stood just inside the door, clutching her worn coat tightly around her thin frame, her eyes scanning the room with quiet hope. Every table was occupied, yet not crowded, just enough empty chairs that it seemed impossible no one would offer her a place. Her shoes were damp, her hair slightly messy from the rain, and her face carried the kind of sadness that doesn't cry loudly but settles deep into the eyes. She didn't ask for much, only a place to sit, to warm her hands around a cup of something hot, to feel human again for a moment. But as she took one hesitant step forward, conversations paused, eyes flickered toward her, and then, one by one, turned away. She approached a table where two women laughed softly over steaming mugs, their scarves neatly folded on the chair beside them. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice barely rising above the hum of the cafe, "may I sit here for a while?" One of the women looked her up and down, her smile fading just slightly, not into cruelty, but into discomfort. "Sorry," she replied, pulling her bag closer to the empty chair, "we're waiting for someone." The girl nodded, already apologizing with her eyes, and stepped back. At another table, a man typing on his laptop avoided her gaze entirely. A young couple whispered something to each other and shook their heads before she even spoke. Each rejection landed softly but painfully, like snow piling up until it became too heavy to bear. No one was rude. No one raised their voice. And yet, no one let her sit. She finally moved toward the corner near the window, standing awkwardly beside a small table meant for one, its single chair already occupied by a neatly folded coat, someone clearly saving it. She didn't ask this time. Her shoulders slumped, and she stared out at the rain, blinking rapidly as her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Memories crept in uninvited, nights spent pretending hunger didn't hurt, days when being invisible felt safer than being judged, moments when kindness felt like a story meant for someone else. The cafe smelled of coffee and fresh bread, and her stomach tightened painfully, not just from hunger but from the ache of being unwanted. She wondered how a room full of people could feel so empty, how warmth could exist everywhere except where she stood. Just as she turned toward the door, ready to leave without making a sound, a chair scraped softly against the floor behind her. The sound was small, almost lost beneath the clinking of cups and low conversations, but to her it felt loud enough to stop time. She turned slowly, unsure, half expecting the chair to be pulled back into place, another silent rejection. Instead, she saw an elderly woman sitting alone at a round table near the window. Her hands were wrinkled, resting calmly on a porcelain cup, steam rising gently between them. The woman's eyes were kind, the kind that didn't rush or judge, and she nodded toward the empty chair across from her. "You can sit here, dear," she said softly, as if offering something precious. For a moment, the girl didn't move. Kindness, when you haven't felt it in a long time, can feel confusing, even frightening. "I don't want to trouble you," the girl whispered. The woman smiled, slow and warm. "You already have by standing there in the cold." She sat down carefully, as though the chair might disappear if she moved too fast. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the table, trying to hide how cold they were. The woman noticed anyway. Without a word, she pushed her cup slightly forward. "Have a sip," she said. "It helps." The girl hesitated, then gently wrapped her fingers around the cup, the warmth seeping into her skin, traveling somewhere deeper than her hands. Tears stung her eyes, but she swallowed them back, embarrassed by their sudden arrival. Around them, the cafe continued as before, laughter, clattering dishes, life moving on, but something had shifted in that small circle of space. The woman asked her name, listened without interrupting, and nodded as if every word mattered. For the first time that evening, the girl felt seen, not as a problem, not as someone out of place, but simply as a person. Minutes passed, or maybe longer, it was hard to tell when the heaviness in her chest slowly began to loosen. The woman called over the server and ordered another drink, then quietly added a plate of food. "She'll have this," she said, leaving no room for refusal. The girl's eyes widened. "I can't," she began, but the woman gently shook her head. "Sometimes," she said, lowering her voice, "we're not meant to earn kindness. We're meant to receive it, so we remember how to give it later." The words settled into the girl's heart, deep and lasting. She took a small bite, then another, each one carrying more than nourishment, it carried dignity. Across the cafe, a few people had begun to notice. A glance lingered. A conversation paused. Something quiet and powerful was unfolding, and it was impossible not to feel it. The girl ate slowly, not because she wasn't hungry, but because she wanted the moment to last. Each bite felt like a promise that the world hadn't completely forgotten her. The elderly woman watched with gentle patience, her eyes soft, as though she had waited her whole life to offer this simple kindness. Around them, the cafe's atmosphere subtly shifted. A man at the next table glanced over, then looked away, uncomfortable, as if realizing something about himself he hadn't wanted to face. The young couple who had earlier whispered now sat in silence, their laughter replaced by thoughtful expressions. The girl felt their eyes but no longer shrank under their weight. She sat straighter, her shoulders lifting just a little, the invisible burden easing. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt like she belonged somewhere, even if only for this moment. The elderly woman spoke again, her voice low but steady, sharing fragments of her own life without drama or self-pity. She spoke of loss, of days when the world felt unbearably heavy, of moments when a stranger's kindness had been the only thing that kept her going. People think kindness has to be loud, she said, stirring her cup slowly, but the quiet kind is the one that saves lives. The girl listened closely, every word settling into her heart like a warm blanket. She realized then that this woman wasn't just offering her food or a chair, she was offering understanding. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared pain, of survival. The girl nodded, tears finally slipping free, no longer something to be ashamed of but something allowed. A server approached hesitantly, glancing between the two of them. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her tone different now, gentler. The elderly woman smiled. "Everything is exactly as it should be," she replied. The server lingered for a second, then quietly placed an extra napkin beside the girl, along with a small wrapped cookie. "On the house," she said, her eyes warm. The girl looked up, surprised, then whispered, "Thank you." It was a small word, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers. Across the cafe, someone else stood and moved a chair closer to their table, making space where none had existed before. Kindness, once started, had begun to ripple outward, touching places it hadn't reached before. The girl noticed the changes slowly, like watching the sky lighten before dawn. A woman at a nearby table shifted her bag from an empty chair and pushed it in, as if realizing too late how simple the gesture could have been earlier. The man with the laptop closed it halfway, his attention no longer on the screen but on the small act of humanity unfolding near the window. No one said anything out loud, yet something collective had softened. The girl felt it in the way the air seemed warmer, less heavy. She glanced at the elderly woman, unsure whether to speak or simply exist in the moment. The woman met her gaze and smiled, the kind of smile that says, "This is how change begins." "You know," the elderly woman said gently, "there was a time when I stood exactly where you were." The girl looked up, surprised. The woman explained how years ago, after losing everything she loved, she had walked into a cafe just like this one, hoping for warmth and human connection. No one had noticed her then, except one person. "A stranger moved a chair for me," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "I never forgot how it felt." She paused, then added, "I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I would be that person for someone else." The girl felt a lump rise in her throat. The idea that pain could transform into purpose was new to her, powerful, and deeply healing. Time passed unnoticed as the rain outside slowed to a soft drizzle. The girl finished her meal, her hands no longer shaking, her breathing calm and steady. She thanked the elderly woman again, unsure how to put her gratitude into words. The woman reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "One day," she said, "you'll see someone standing where you once stood. When that day comes, don't hesitate." The girl nodded, tears shining in her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from hope. As she stood to leave, the cafe no longer felt like a place she didn't belong. It felt like a reminder, proof that even in a world full of strangers, kindness still had as the girl walked toward the door, something unexpected happened. The same woman who had earlier pulled her bag onto the empty chair now stood up and held the door open for her, offering a shy, apologetic smile. "I'm glad you found a seat," she said softly. The girl paused, surprised, then smiled back. There was no bitterness left in her heart, only understanding. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving the streets washed clean, the air fresh and light. She stepped out of the cafe feeling different, not because her problems had vanished, but because she no longer felt alone in carrying them. Behind her, the cafe buzzed again, but now it felt warmer, kinder, as though something invisible yet powerful had been restored. Days later, the memory of that evening stayed with her, replaying itself in quiet moments. Whenever she felt small or unseen, she remembered the scrape of that chair, the warmth of the cup in her hands, the way one person's courage to care had changed everything. One afternoon, she noticed a young boy standing outside a bakery, his face pressed against the glass, watching others eat. Without overthinking, she walked inside, bought a small pastry, and sat beside him on the bench outside. She didn't lecture or ask questions. She simply shared. As the boy smiled, crumbs on his lips and wonder in his eyes, she understood the truth of what the elderly woman had meant. Kindness grows when it's passed on. Somewhere, in cafes and streets and quiet corners of the world, people were still standing, waiting, hoping for a place to sit, a sign they mattered. Most would never ask. Some would be turned away without a word. But every now and then, someone would move a chair, share a cup, or offer a seat without conditions. And in those small moments, lives would change. The girl carried that lesson with her wherever she went, a quiet promise stitched into her heart. Because kindness doesn't need permission, and it doesn't need applause. Sometimes, all it needs is one empty chair, and the courage to say, "You can sit here."